Notre Dame just put together their most complete performance of the season against Navy, but did they prove they're a legit contender to make a run in the playoff? That's next on Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome into Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. My name is Tyler Wojciak and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018 and now I'm a producer at Fox Sports. And I'm thrilled to have you here on this Tuesday, October 29th. And thanks for starting your day with us by making this your first listen of the day. As always, you can watch a full episode on YouTube or you can listen wherever you get your podcasts. If you are watching along on YouTube, please remember to give this video a like and subscribe. Or if you're listening to the pod, please rate the show 5 stars and subscribe on your preferred platform. In today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Really excited about today's show. Luke Smith is going to join me here in a second, as he does every Tuesday during the season, to break down everything we liked and didn't like from Notre Dame's win over Navy. Plus, we get into what this win means, because it was a very impressive performance. And now that the Irish are back in the top 10 of the AP poll, there is more discussion around this team from a national perspective than there has been since that loss to Northern Illinois. So let's bring in Luke. All right, Luke Smith is back with me here. No boots on the ground report this weekend because Luke was in New York, but not at the game. We both were at weddings this weekend. Someone in the comments actually said that you and I go to more weddings than anyone they know. I think that is a bit of a stretch, but how was your weekend in New York, and what do you think is the biggest headline coming out of this weekend?
Yeah, whoever that commenter was, actually kind of a good point. Just recently, I think it's been really out of control, and thankfully we're kind of over that little 2 months, 3 month run here, but not an unfair point. I'm glad it's over. That said, a lot of fun in New York. I was able to see quite a few people on Friday who were going to the game on Saturday, and I kind of felt like the vibes were going to be high at that game. I will say that I actually showed some pretty good restraint this weekend, because Friday night I was out drinking somewhere and I had people multiple times try to talk me into going to the first half of that game in New Jersey and making it back for the wedding. And I said, I'm absolutely not doing that. But I do have to give one guy at the wedding credit, because he did that. Jimmy Lewis, shout out him. He went to the first half of the game, met up with some buddies, and made it back in time for Mass at 3:30. So pretty impressive, especially because he was out till 3 a.m. the night before. So good showing, but it was fun. The game was pretty relaxing, honestly, which is, it's a couple weeks of that in a row now, which you're trying to get used to. Like, you're so damaged by just everything that's happened to this team. And really it all stems back to the NIU game. But Saturday was one of the most, just stress-free wins I've watched in a while. And at least since Stanford, that is. So we're building stress-free performances on top of each other, which is a good place to be at going into November.
Right. We haven't really felt pressed watching this team in a long time. That is a good thing. I am more than okay with that. But one last thing in the wedding, wasn't this basically the same crew that you had to endure the NIU loss with?
That's a great point. It was. And, I noticed a significant difference on Saturday night on the dance floor compared to NIU, because that wedding, I will say, NIU is still an awesome time, like really fun. And honestly, maybe glad I was at that instead of in South Bend, because I think mentally I wouldn't have been in a great place. But some of the folks that were at both weddings the first time, let's just say they were not able to get over it and were not really enjoying themselves at that one. This time, dance floor was definitely a little bit more lively. People were feeling themselves, and I think that's part of what happens when your team's 7-1 and you just beat a ranked team by 37 points or whatever it was. So definitely, it was funny seeing the duality of the situation, if you will.
Yeah, it was a lot different Saturday, I can tell you that much. And it was a relief going into the wedding, being like, you know what? I have had a really nice afternoon. I was on the East Coast. I was in Eastern Standard Time. I was in Louisville. So being able to watch the game at noon and then enjoy the wedding and all of that without having to deal with watching Notre Dame on my phone or anything like that was very enjoyable. So kind of lucked out there with the noon game. But we are going to talk a little bit more about that NIU game later on. But let's focus here on the Navy game. What did you like the most in that performance?
I'm going to start with Jordan Faison. He had a game after I asked for it last week. I came on the show last week and lamented the lack of production from Jordan Faison this year. I acknowledge that a lot of that has been due to injury, but I really felt like he could be a weapon that could help the rest of the offense open up over the second half of the year. And on Saturday, he was their leading receiver. He had 4 catches for 52 yards, and I think he had a 20-plus yarder wiped off the books from a phantom holding call. So he also pancaked a Navy cornerback on an ND touchdown run where he really wasn't even close to the play, and he just kind of lit the guy up for the hell of it, which you kind of love to see. And more than anything, I think that he possesses a speed and a skill set that no other guy in that receiver rotation really seems to have. And I think that you started to see that on Saturday with some of the routes they were running with him and what he can do after the catch too. So it's going to be fascinating to see. And I think he can really explode over this last month if he stays healthy.
Great game by him overall. And I thought it was really important the way he bounced back because he had a bad drop early on in the game. And sometimes when that happens, it might be easy to go away from that receiver the rest of the game, especially a guy like Faison who's missed the majority of the start of the season due to an injury. So something like that could have shaken up his confidence, but it didn't at all. After that, he turned it on, ended up having a really good game. That actually leads me to the first thing I liked. And I'm looking at the Notre Dame wide receiver room as a whole. They're finally stepping up. And it reminded me, like, going into this season, the reason that people were optimistic about this group was because they had a bunch of talented players, despite the lack of a true wide receiver one. I mean, Bo Collins has sort of asserted himself as that guy, but he's not like an alpha, someone like a Chase Claypool in 2019 who just always was getting the ball, or someone like Will Fuller back in the day. They lacked the star power, but they were deep, and it took a while, but I think we're finally starting to see it. You mentioned Jordan Faison. He had his best game of the year. Bo Collins and Chris Mitchell both added touchdowns. Jaden Greathouse and Jaden Thomas had some nice third down receptions as well. So it was nice to see everyone get involved because that's really the first time that we could say that about the entire group, really at all this season.
It is. And I like seeing, like you said, kind of just the ball getting spread around. And I think if you go back and look at sort of what Mike Denbrock had set up on Saturday, it was intended, and you really saw Riley Leonard kind of going through his progressions to get the ball distributed around. And Mitchell Evans also had one of his better games of the season too, which I know he's not a receiver, but he's, one of their best receiving tight ends. And they try to get Eli Raridan involved too. He had a bad drop at one point, but I think that you saw just a lot of variety in the passing game, and that was nice to see.
We also saw Denbrock scheme up some guys. I saw Mike Golick Jr. posted this on X where he showed how basically Notre Dame built a play off that screen, that tunnel screen that they had been running to Jeremiah Love where he splits out wide, and then off of that, you have like the fake pump and go. Well, they basically set up both of those plays. Navy had them covered, and then there was Mitchell Evans coming across the middle wide open for a nice first down conversion. So I really like what I'm seeing from this offense. And as I talked about in yesterday's show, like they are fun to watch now in a way that they have not been at all at any point up until now.
Right. And I didn't know that we were ever going to get to that point this year, even when they were beating Purdue 66-7, because for all intents and purposes, Purdue was an FCS team. So it's if I have an opportunity to take a shot at Purdue, I'm going to do it. So there it is. But they've gotten there. They've gotten to a consistent level where I know that some might argue that in that Georgia Tech game, there was a little bit of bogging down, but like that to me felt different than what I saw earlier in the year. And really what I think you've seen now is 3.5 solid performances in a row.
Right. They're starting to put it all together. And I think the bye week was huge for them earlier on in the season. Now they have another bye week. So I wonder if we're going to see as big of a shift coming out of this bye week. I think this one is going to be way more focused on just getting healthy. And that's really important, like especially for a guy like Jordan Faison, who's really finally starting to put it all together. But another big piece in that is Billy Strouth. That leads me to the next thing that I liked. Really thought the offensive line played really well in this game. Billy Strouth's return to the starting lineup made a huge difference. I was surprised to see him at left guard instead of right guard just because he had played right guard up until he got hurt against Purdue. But when you think about how Rocco Spindler has played since he came in for Billy Strouth and you compare that to what Sam Pendleton has done all season long, I feel more confident with Rocco Spindler out there, not only because of how he's played this year, but the fact that he was the starter for the majority of last season as well. Notre Dame kept Leonard clean, and really, you think back over the course of the past few games, there really hasn't been that much talk about the offensive line, and that's probably as good of a sign as any that this group has really started to improve on a week-to-week basis. And I don't look at them as like a big weakness on the team anymore. in a way that I did probably going into the season.
I don't either. And I don't remember if I said this on this show or if you and I were just talking about this, but Joe Rudolph deserves a lot of credit for really having just a vast amount of parts to have to figure out how they were all going to fit. You lose your top lineman or, in terms of pro potential, probably on the first day of camp or whatever day of camp it was earlier this year, Charles Jag you saw. And then you lose Ashton Craig and Billy Shrouth for an extended amount of time, Craig for the season. And the way that they've been able to just plug in guys and really, they didn't lose the NIU game because of the offensive line. They really haven't put Notre Dame in danger of losing a game either. Like, that's very impressive to me because for as much comparisons as this line got to the 2021 one early on, like, they're not even in the same world. Like, it's not close.
It also helps to have Riley Leonard back there instead of Jack Cohn.
And I'm glad you said that because I think Charlie Woodick said this and he's right. Like, I talked about Leonard's sack avoidance, but he was talking about Leonard climbing the pocket and comparing it to just how it's an elite trait. Like, it's like Steph Curry hitting 35-footers. Like, it's just, there are very few guys who can do that. And it's true. It's truly like a thing of beauty to watch. And the only thing that's kind of weird is like Leonard has this thing when he'll break the pocket. I don't know if you've noticed this, break the pocket, pick up a first down. When he jumps or like runs out of bounds, I think he's like going to injure himself the way he does this. It's like he is playing basketball, almost like elevating in the air to embrace contact, and he just comes down really abruptly. And so that's the one complaint I have, but it's almost like a bit of the artistry to his escapability.
I think part of it has to do with how big he is. He doesn't really look like a natural runner, but he's so fast and he's outrunning guys, even though it doesn't look like he's running that hard. And he's so difficult to bring down because he's 6'4". And you're right, he does kind of look like a basketball player, like someone who goes up, absorbs the foul, and then just lands semi-awkwardly. There are times where he'll go out of bounds and I'm like, dude, just chill out a little bit. Like sometimes he takes on more contact than he probably should because it's like, you are still the quarterback, dude, and you have been a little bit susceptible to injuries. But I've really liked what I've seen from him lately. This isn't even on my list, but just as a scrambler, because Notre Dame has not been running him in the designed run game nearly as much, but he's been a lot better when the plays break down and he just takes what the defense gives him in a way that he wasn't early on when he would just kind of force things roll out right and try to make something that's not really there. This game was the best example of him seeing what Navy was doing and being like, all right, fine, you're just going to leave this chunk of the field wide open. I'm going to run for 15 yards. And some people are still getting upset about that, but I think he, like, in addition to that, he's also keeping his eyes downfield and making some plays. Like, this is the Riley Leonard that Notre Dame thought they were getting when they got him in the transfer portal.
It is. And speaking of guys that Notre Dame thought they were getting, I want to talk about Jalen Snead on Saturday because he had the best game of his season. He was all over the field. Of course, he did recover that fumble in the end zone for a touchdown that poor Blake Horvath. I don't know how that happened. But he also tied in leading the team with 9 tackles and had half a tackle for loss. More importantly, he actually had the highest PFF grade of his career with an 84.9. He had earned a rating over 75 just once in his first 2 seasons. I know PFF grades aren't everything, but it truly felt like he was having a great game on Saturday. And for a guy who has seemingly publicly been frustrated at times, this had to feel really good for him. And I think it has to be nice for Notre Dame to know that they have him as kind of just like an option wrecker when they have another game against Army in Yankee Stadium in just under a month. And probably in the back of his mind, he knows he's going to play a big role in that one too. So glad to see him have some success on Saturday. And hopefully this just kind of gets him to have a really, really strong last month of the season here.
Isn't it kind of funny how there's like a few Notre Dame players when I think of option wreckers, like you mentioned, the first 2 names that come to mind are Greer Martini and Robert Blanton. He was always great against the option. Where does Snead rank? He's going to have another opportunity against Army, but he's kind of climbing up those ranks, and that is a pretty important position on the Notre Dame defense because they have to play Navy every single year.
Yeah, and particularly in 2024 it is because they've got Navy and Army. So definitely glad for him that he had that performance on Saturday.
Yeah, it was a big game for him, much needed because, I think the expectations for him were really high going into the season. And part of it is because he hasn't quite lived up to that. But, I mean, also, Jaden Osprey just has been really, really good. Like, he has taken advantage of his opportunities when he's on the field. Same with KVA and same with Drake Bowen. Like, there's just a lot of really talented linebackers in that room, and there's an odd man out. And unfortunately, it's been Snead up to this point. So it was good for him to finally get back out there. But when Blake Horvath dropped that ball, do you know what it reminded me of, like, instantly? Because it was the last time I had seen something like that. It was a Notre Dame quarterback. I'll give you a hint.
Yeah, Drew Pine?
No. Of Drew Pine's many mistakes, this was actually not one of them. I was thinking Tommy Rees against Michigan at the Big House when they just completely collapsed in the fourth quarter. I think Notre Dame was in the red zone, and then Rees just dropped the ball. And I thought to myself, like, because that was one of the most brutal losses ever, even though that Notre Dame team ended up not really being that good that season. But it was something, it's like, that would only happen to Notre Dame, so it was actually comforting to see it happen to someone else.
Yeah, that's a good callback. The fumble I think of in that game is when Denard Robinson fumbled and then somehow picked it up himself for a touchdown. Anyways, let's not talk about that game. But yeah, it is refreshing to see that happen to somebody else.
There were some cursed games inside that stadium. But last thing I want to say of the things that I liked about this one, and some people might think I'm being sarcastic, I am being serious. The lack of injuries in this game is great. Because Notre Dame is going into the bye week. This is a perfect time for the team to get healthy. And we've talked about the injury history against Navy in the past. They have been on a bit of a good run. I mean, there was a really bad stretch there from, like, I'm thinking against Navy specifically. So we're kind of through this. Obviously, the season has been really disappointing on the injury front. But it felt like there was a few years there where every time Notre Dame played Navy, they were going to lose at least one or two guys in their starting defense. I think the fact that the NCAA changed the rules about cut blocking has really changed that significantly. But the fact that Notre Dame was able to come out of this game without any serious injuries, at least that we know of now, because I guess after the Benjamin Morrison thing, we can never be too certain. But nothing major happened on the field. I was a little bit worried about Howard Cross's availability going into this game. That was not an issue at all. So the fact that they got through this and they go into the bye week, like, they might start getting healthier for the first time in a long time, where it felt like every week they were just getting more and more injured.
I agree. And I don't know if those watched on the YouTube here, I was literally knocking on the counter I'm sitting at. So, and also, like, MetLife Stadium is known for kind of just being a graveyard and, like, dragging guys and rupturing guys' knees. So I agree. That was definitely a promising development that they didn't lose anybody.
Yeah, there was one play where Jeremiah Love was running the ball and he was, like, fighting for extra yards, and then he got brought down awkwardly. I was like, dude, just go down. I had, like, a moment of panic just because it's MetLife, and really the bad luck that Notre Dame has had this season.
Yeah, well, speaking of Jeremiah Love, that is the third thing I want to touch on. His continued dominance remains so impressive, and I was thinking when I was looking at this earlier that this might have been his first 100-yard game of the season. It's actually his second, but Purdue, so it doesn't really count. But man,
you're on fire today with Purdue.
I hope there's no Boilermaker fans listening to this one. But man, what a special player. 12 carries, 102 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Some of the tackles he was breaking on third downs were just ridiculous. And I was kind of getting annoyed, actually, because McElroy and McDonough just weren't reacting to what he was doing. Like, some of the tackles he was breaking were absurd. But then I listened to McElroy's show today, and he basically admitted that he had a quad box where he was watching Ohio State and Nebraska and the other games in the booth because the game was such a blowout on Saturday. So started to make a little bit more sense why maybe he missed some of that stuff.
Honestly, respect to him for admitting it, because that game was such a snoozer in the second half.
Yeah, so I kind of get it now, but this guy, his numbers aren't as good as some of those past Notre Dame running backs that have been really good. He is clearly, to me, the best of the bunch, and thank God they have another year with him because he just continues to amaze with his abilities.
This also felt like the first time, really, all season long, where he was so clearly running back one. They weren't trying to force the ball to other guys and they didn't have to. Like, he was out there for the bulk of the snaps at the running back. He was getting carries. He was taking advantage. Also, like, we hadn't really seen him get a ton of carries on third downs earlier on in the year. Now he's getting third down run attempts, and then he's just taking him to the house. Like, he is so good. He forced 4 more missed tackles. That long run of 64 yards. Like, when Jane Greathouse got hawked, I was so annoyed. But once Jeremiah Love broke into that second level, I'm like, that guy is not getting hawked. This is a touchdown. And he had 2 touchdowns in this game. And you and I have talked about this before. We love Kyron Williams. I think that when Jeremiah Love's career is all said and done at Notre Dame, he is going to go down as the best Notre Dame running back in a really long time. During a period of time where Notre Dame has actually had a ton of talent in that room, I think Love is going to assert himself as the best.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and it does sound crazy saying it when you see what Kyron Williams is doing in the NFL right now, but I think it's likely. So I'm with you.
Before Luke and I get to the few things that we didn't like from Notre Dame's win over Navy, it is time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we have pulled over $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. The best part? It's risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, I'm supporting Jalen Sneed. I just pitched in $100, and I'd love for you to join me. Even $10 makes a difference. Let's show Sneed the love and keep him connected to our school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, and enter referral code LOCKEDON, and you're entered. Already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Download Roy now and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return on you for more info. Roy, support the players, change the game. All right, that's it for the things we did like. Not a ton to dislike from this game, but what stands out to you?
So you mentioned Greathouse getting hawked, and that's actually the first thing. Let's be honest. There isn't a ton to be upset about. However, on that first drive, Riley Leonard connects with Greathouse on a 3rd and 6 on a slant. I just don't know how he doesn't outrun the Navy guy there. Like, we've been talking about him sort of as wide receiver 1. I think it's clear and fair to say he is not that this season, but he still made some plays. I don't want to say he's had a bad season, but man, like that just, you can't get caught there. That's got to be a touchdown. Notre Dame going against Navy. That can't happen.
Yeah, that really bothered me too. I was pissed off when I saw that happen live because he caught the ball and was immediately looking at the defender. Like if he just put his head down and tried to sprint to the end zone, I think he gets in. I mean, you got to give some credit to that Navy defensive back for making that tackle. I also got annoyed that Adon Schuler did not return his fumble to the house because I thought if he just didn't really wait for the blockers, like he had a lane if he just put his foot down, turn the Jets on, I thought he could have scored there too. But again, we are nitpicking here, so I'm actually just this might not make a ton of sense. I think Navy turned the ball over too much. I can't believe I'm saying this about a Notre Dame opponent. They turned the ball over so many times that it actually took some of the fun out of it. Like I almost felt secondhand embarrassment watching that, and it made for a less enjoyable experience because it was like watching a bad JV high school team. Like that one kickoff that just drilled the Navy return man in the face and then went out of bounds was like, this is a joke. I got so annoyed that they were ranked in that moment. And I know that some people in the national media are going to use that to discredit Notre Dame's win. And I'm not even really talking about that because I just don't really care at this point. But it felt like watching a boxer beat up on another boxer in the ring, and he beat him up so bad, the guy's not protecting himself to the point where like, oh, you just like kind of feel bad for him and it becomes less enjoyable. That's what it felt like watching Navy, especially a Navy team that was billed as this, really good Navy team that could actually pose a serious threat with the new offense and all that stuff. It's like, nope, this is the same old Navy, the one that Notre Dame housed last year in Dublin, and this year they did the exact same thing, and it just looked a little bit different.
It did, and I thought you were actually going a different direction with this, saying that you were concerned they turned the ball over so much because they were just so reckless, and like these are guys that are supposed to be defending our borders and the seas. Because I had that thought, and I'm only half joking.
Should we spend more money on defense after that performance, Mike?
Let's get some reinforcements in there, maybe. But no, you're right. But I do think that Notre Dame should be given some credit for that because it was clear that their speed was just overwhelming to these guys. And you know what I would actually equate it to is kind of like when you're watching a high school basketball game and one team is just far superior to the other, and that far superior team full court presses that team, and like they've never seen a press before, and they just start turning the ball over, like just unforced errors all over the gym. That's what it looked like on Saturday, where Navy had never seen dudes that fast, and they were just careless, not even careless, just nervous, like dropping the ball, making bad pitches. Like that's what it looked like out there. And that speaks to how big the gap is between Notre Dame and Navy, but credit to Notre Dame for playing with intensity and showing up, even if some of that was, or most of that was just truly fortuitous, and really they didn't have to do anything extra outside of what they did.
Yeah, I felt like the Notre Dame defense definitely played a hand in a lot of those turnovers. Like Navy was just pressing on the option. Like that first one they ran early on in the game, Notre Dame's speed and their size certainly impacted that. But I guess I'm more referring to like the muffed punts. And
those are horrible.
Blake Horvath just dropping the ball in the end zone. It's like, all right, come on. Like this almost has diminishing returns because Notre Dame would have dominated them so thoroughly, even if they never turned the ball over. So it's like now it's just kind of taking away from that. And again, I'm not even talking about the national discussion around this game, because if that's what, if you look at that and say that's the reason why Notre Dame dominated, then you just clearly weren't watching the game, because Notre Dame was so much better than them in every phase of the game. So it was just sort of a weird dynamic. You're watching Navy like, come on, dude. Like this is embarrassing for you guys. Please stop doing this on a national stage. And the kickoff is what really solidified it for me.
Yeah. To be fair, I actually don't think that has been the discourse nationally, and I think that has been evidenced by Notre Dame moving up to 8th, in which we said they will never get credit for this win. They got some credit for this win. They jumped in a big way, and so any Notre Dame fans that are kind of out there like complaining about national narratives, I don't care about what somebody on the internet says, and frankly, you shouldn't care about the AP poll. But the reality is, like, the vast majority of America is like, okay, this is a good Notre Dame team. Now, if you talk to fans in the Big 12, the country's widest league, not the deepest league, they might have some different takes, but I think pretty universally, people think Notre Dame's a good team.
Yeah, we are going to get to that. So just real quickly, the last thing I didn't like about this game is the fact that I have to talk about the officiating again. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because it obviously did not impact the outcome at all, but I thought the holding call on Emil Wagner was ridiculous, and obviously the roughing the passer on KVA. Shout out to Greg McElroy, who's getting a lot of love on this broadcast for coming down really hard on the officials. And Sean McDonough as a play-by-play guy, like sometimes he's kind of like meh for me. But sometimes when he really gets going, he does not hold back and does not have a filter like most play-by-play people. And he really went in on the officials in that moment. I really did enjoy that.
He did. The only other thing, I'm glad that you are bringing this up, because I couldn't do that again, even though I feel the exact same way. Like I've done it 2 weeks in a row. I can't complain about refs again. So thank you for doing that. The only thing I want to mention is just like this uncertainty around Mitch Jeter. The longer this goes on with Mitch Jeter, the less comfortable I feel. And Notre Dame missed another field goal on Saturday and an extra point. They need the guy back. They need Money Mitch back, who hit that, just iced the game away at A&M. That gave them what would you say, the third best win of anybody in the country this year. And they just can't keep trotting this walk-on out there who looks like Bowlby from Jimmy Neutron, because the kid just like when I see him out there, I have no confidence he's going to make a kick.
Yeah, I mean, credit to the walk-on for getting his opportunity, but at a certain point, it's like, all right, we'd like to have the kicker that they got in the transfer portal, who, honestly, if South Carolina had him, they'd probably have a much different season right now, and I'm sure that people on the Gamecock message boards have talked about that at length, but the fact that he has not really been a participant at all lately has me worried, and I'm not sure if this 2-week break during the bye week is going to be enough. And sort of on this topic, the fact that CJ Carr is still not throwing the ball during warmups is definitely something to monitor. Pete Sampson from The Athletic pointed that out, that he was dressed, but just sort of standing off to the side with all the quarterbacks. Marcus Freeman called it elbow soreness, but the fact that he's still not doing anything is a bit of a concern for me right now.
Big time. He's going to get surgery this offseason, isn't he?
I don't know. Probably. I am going to save that conversation for the offseason, because I'm sure it's going to come up a lot. So you mentioned Notre Dame moved up from 12th to 8th in the AP poll. I believe they are 9th in the coaches poll. And now that Notre Dame is sort of back in the national discussion, I feel like after that win, they have been the focal point of a lot of discourse about college football. And you also have to consider the fact that the first CFP rankings come out next Tuesday. So with a win like this, we knew that they wouldn't get a ton of credit for it, but they actually have gotten a little bit more than we thought. What do you make of Notre Dame's ranking and the way that they are being talked about relative to some of the other top teams in college football right now?
I think it's pretty fair. I think it's I think they're a legitimately good team, and there were definitely some weeks post NIU where I wasn't there. And now you see the sort of sustained success they put together. I think they have like the highest margin of victory over the last 6-7 weeks, right? Of anybody in the country, they're just kind of whooping everybody. And I think that there are very few teams in the country who, if they went up against, I wouldn't feel comfortable about them beating. So that is a crazy place for me to be, because you can't also ignore the fact that they did lose to NIU, and you never know when that sort of thing might rear its ugly head. But part of me does want to believe that that was just a complete fluke and aberration, and it kind of was. So I feel pretty good about this ball club, but I'm also not going to tell anybody who says that they have the worst loss in the country that they're wrong, because they do. When I woke up on Sunday morning and I was at LaGuardia, it was pitch black at 5:45, and I saw that NIU lost to 3-5 Ball State. I just cursed Thomas Hammock again, because I cannot stand that guy, and he is getting everything he deserved. But I like this team a lot. I do. And it's going to be a really fun November to watch, and it's hopefully going to be a fun postseason to watch too, because though they're banged up, man, I'd put these guys up against pretty much anybody in the country.
For me, the Navy win was the first time where I watched them. I was like, this team is a legitimately good team, and they have what it takes to at least, do some damage in the college football playoff. I felt like after Benjamin Morrison got hurt, I was like, I think that put a ceiling on this team. I don't think they're going to be able to win a playoff game. But then you look at the way things are shaking out week to week in college football, and you look at the different matchups. Like I saw Bud Elliott from 24/7 Sports put out his projection, and it would have Notre Dame as the 7th seed playing Boise State at home. They should be able to win that game, although I don't want to play Ashton Genty. And then I saw some other projections which have Notre Dame going up against Clemson in the first round. And you start to think like this is going to be so matchup dependent, and that is when the seed and that sort of discussion is really going to come into play. But I think right now at this point in the season, like it's the end of October, and for all the people that are getting really upset about where Notre Dame is ranked and when Texas A&M is ranked ahead of them, I understand some frustrations, but things are going to play out. It's going to be fine. And I'm with you. I have a really hard time grappling with the fact that Notre Dame simultaneously has probably the 3rd best win of any team in college football, going on the road and beating Texas A&M in the season opener, while also having by far the worst loss. So when people are having these arguments about Notre Dame, and like you mentioned the Big 12, like should they be ranked ahead of BYU? And I always say, like, I think Notre Dame would absolutely beat both those teams probably by double digits. But when they say you lost to Northern Illinois, I don't really have a comeback.
You know what? That did happen.
It's like, okay, so in the head-to-head battle with Texas A&M, I think if it came down to it, Notre Dame would get the edge by the CFP committee because they have shown that they really value head-to-head. But you just think about all these other teams. It's like, how, on one hand, how much credit should they get for the win against Texas A&M, and how much should they be punished against Northern Illinois? Like, it's so hard to wrap my head around, and the fact that they lost that game makes me physically ill, and it's going to be this black cloud that hangs over this team unless they are able to make a run to the college football playoff. But that continues to rear its ugly head, and it's only going to get worse, man. It's only going to keep coming up, and until I come up with a good comeback, I'm just going to kind of stay out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't got anything other than I just can't stand Thomas Hammock. But just in response to what you said about Morrison and his injury and how you felt like that might have put a ceiling, I think I agreed at the time, but then you see Leonard Moore and it's like, well, what if Leonard Moore is just freshman year Benjamin Morrison? Then they actually might be okay after all, because that's kind of what that's what it's seeming like he's like.
I'm going to be honest. If I had no idea that Benjamin Morrison was hurt and Leonard Moore was out there in a number 20 jersey, I would just think that's Benjamin. Like, I wouldn't. His play has been like, he's obviously not as good as Benjamin Morrison, but the drop off has not been very noticeable at all. Now, granted, Notre Dame is playing some pretty weak teams. It'd probably stand out a lot more if they were playing like Alabama and Leonard Moore had to cover Ryan Williams, but it's really impressive what he's done as a true freshman. And Mike Mickens, man, like, I don't know if there's a better defensive backs coach doing it right now, because it's not just the fact that he's able to develop these guys. it's that he's able to evaluate them. And when they come on the field, I mean, look at what Cam Hart is doing in the NFL. Have you seen that?
No,
He's been
not.
awesome for the Chargers. He just started recently. I think he took Chris Olave out of the game. Like he laid the hit stick on him. So he's been really good. And I just think that as long as he is the Notre Dame defensive backs coach, this is just going to be commonplace. You lose your starter, it's like, all right, well, the next guy in is probably awesome too.
Pretty wild, but especially when you consider the Notre Dame defensive backs that we grew up with outside of 2002. But yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
Remember when we thought Gary Gray was good? Or maybe that was just me.
No. I never thought that guy was good.
I'm just kidding. I just brought him up because we already talked about that Michigan game, but we've already talked about that too much. You got anything to look forward to during the bye week? What do you feel about this weekend of college football? There's actually some pretty good games.
Is Penn State, Ohio State this week?
Yes, it is.
What else do we have? So, I mean, maybe I like Penn State if Aller doesn't play. But
that backup looked pretty good.
It looks better than Aller. Not that that's saying a whole lot, but what else do we got this week? Let's see. We got
Aller has been pretty good. Maybe he gets some revenge for Saturday, but yeah, the fact that they just put in their backup and he started dealing. That's really just the main event. There's really not that many
I think we got
games.
Texas Tech probably beating Iowa State.
That would be rich.
Honestly, and I apologize if there are any folks on this program that are both Indiana and Notre Dame fans. I'm so sick of this Indiana thing, and it's ridiculous. They haven't played anybody in the FBI top 40. And personally, I am seeing far more IU stuff in Chicago than I ever have. And it's because these fans don't exist. Like, you talk to any Indiana grad, they probably went to 2 football games their entire college career. So they need to lose because I am sick of hearing them. And if this thing gets down to the wire and somehow they beat Michigan and somehow they beat Ohio State, if they beat Ohio State, then okay, whatever, credit to them. But we are going to hear it if they lose to Ohio State and they're 11-1 that they should be in the playoff over Notre Dame.
Did you see that Ohio State-Nebraska game?
I followed the start of it, didn't see the whole thing.
I'm sure they're going to play better this weekend in a game that matters on the road against Penn State, but it just doesn't make sense to me. They have so many good players, and they could not move the ball on offense. Now, they did lose their starting left tackle. They've been dealing with some injuries on the offensive line, which is another good reminder to all the fans who want Lauren Landau to get fired. Injuries happen to other teams too, other good teams like Ohio State. They're dealing with a lot of injuries on the offensive line, and that showed up in a big way. They could not run the ball at all. So I have no idea what to expect in this game against Penn State, and that Indiana-Ohio State game could be really interesting, and that is a crazy thing to say at this point in the year. Yeah,
I bet if you looked at it, probably the average margin of victory in that series is 50, over the last 10 years at least, for sure. I might look at that after that, but yeah, maybe Lou Holtz was just right about Ryan Day after all. That could be.
All right, we'll end it there. Luke, we'll see you next Tuesday.
All right, sounds good.
This episode is presented by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. If you're looking for a winner, we're giving out winners on this podcast. I gave you Browns +9 against the Ravens at the end of last week. That certainly hit. The Browns actually won outright. I'm not going to lie, I'm recording this during Monday Night Football, so I don't know if my pick in that one is going to be a winner. So we're going to just look ahead to Thursday Night Football. I am taking the Houston Texans -1.5 over the Jets on the road. That spread might be a trap. It feels like one because the Jets have been awful lately. The Texans are 6-2. But you know what? I'm going to take the bait. I think the Texans are going to cover -1.5. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, that's a wrap for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. I'm going to be right back here tomorrow morning, plus a new episode out the rest of the week. So make sure that you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.